coming to an end in some places. Syrians know just how hard it will be to live together again.
And inspiring future generations, the Science Museum here in London buys the capsule that took British astronaut Tim Peake into space. Hello and welcome. Italy's Prime Minister Matteo Renzi is meeting the country's president to formally submit his resignation after suffering a crushing defeat in his referendum on constitutional reform. Well, he set off within the past hour to the presidential palace in Rome after chairing a final cabinet meeting. So what comes next? Well, a period of political turmoil is on the cards, and that would pose new risks for the country's troubled banking sector. It also deals a blow to the European Union when at a time it's battling anti-establishment forces on multiple fronts. The President may ask Mr Renzi to stay on at least until the next budget is announced. That's due later this month. He could also appoint a new caretaker administration or call snap elections. Our Europe editor, Katia Adler, now reports.
Renzi, a casa!
Renzi, go home, resign. As soon as results started coming in yesterday, victorious supporters of the no vote in Italy's referendum loudly demanded the resignation of their Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi. And he was listening. The first Italian premier, he claimed, to take political responsibility.
Ho perso, e lo dico a voce alta.
I lost, and I say it loud and clear, even if I have a lump in my throat. I wasn't able to win.
Viva l'Italia, in bocca al lupo a tutti noi.
Long live Italy, and good luck to all of us.
Matteo Renzi came to government promising to change Italy or change jobs. But this morning we found members of his government a little dazed by it all.
The constitutional reform has been rejected by the Italian people. How could we stay in this format with this government?
Thing is, when we took to the streets of Rome today, no voters told us they'd rejected their Prime Minister, not just his reforms.
Contro Renzi.
Contro Renzi.
E contro Renzi.
Stiamo contro Renzi.
Contro Renzi.
Music to the ears of Mr Renzi's political rivals in the popular and populist five-star movement.
If populist means that we are for people, we are populist. Now we are asking for the election as soon as possible.
Is this the beginning of a new era in Italy?
I hope. I hope. I hope.
All this political turmoil, of course, front page news here as across Europe. But here in Bella Roma, Italy's beating political heart, it's very much business as usual. And that's because Italians are used to changing Prime Minister. They've had 63 of them since the end of the Second World War. That's 4 times as many as we've had in the UK. So Italy is used to muddling through. But of course, this country doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a key EU player and the 3rd largest economy in the Eurozone. So whatever's happening here has a big impact elsewhere too. And a crisis is looming in Italy's banks, especially this one, the country's 3rd biggest. Bank failures would hit hard, here and abroad. In Italy, the bella figura, looking good on the outside, is paramount. But scratch the beautiful surface and you'll see problems, weighing down Italians and worrying their European neighbours. Katia Adler, BBC News, Rome.
Just want to bring a development on this story. During that package by our Europe editor, we've had some news that Italy's president, this is all according to the Reuters news agency, Italy's president had asked Prime Minister Renzi to delay his resignation until the budget is passed by Parliament, but that could only be a few days. So a development there in the story out of Italy that the president has asked Prime Minister Renzi to delay his resignation until the budget has been passed. Well, for more on this, let's speak to Francesco Bongara. He's a political reporter with the Italian news agency ANSA, and he joins me now from Rome. Francesco, good of you to join us. We've had some news there that the President has asked Prime Minister to delay his resignation. What do you think that now means? Early elections, or will we see another leader from within his party selected?
I confirm what you just said. Basically, if President Mattarella would have accepted Renzi's official resignation, that would have meant that the Parliament would have had to stop, so the budget wouldn't have been able to be passed in time for the end of the year. So at this point, Renzi will have to wait in Palazzo Chigi, which is the office of the Prime Minister in this country. In Italy, he'll have to stay there until the end of this week, when the Senate will give the final go to the budget, and at that point he will go back to the presidential palace and confirm his resignation. What is going to happen now? Pretty hard to predict and to say. I don't think we will get to the end of the legislature, which is supposed to be in 2018. Situation is pretty tough, and I mean, the atmosphere is not easy at the moment. So my guess will be that there will be a technical government run either by the Speaker of the Senate, Mr. Pietro Grasso, who is a former anti-mafia judge, or by the actual Finance Minister, Mr. Piercarlo Padoan, who is a real guarantee towards the markets. They will go on for a while, they will pass a new electoral system, and then we will go to the polls.
Francesco, the real winners out of this referendum were the opposition parties. Just explain who they are and what they stand for. Obviously, the Five Star Movement and the Northern League were big pushes for the no vote, and they seem to be emboldened by this result.
Well, they're really emboldened about this result, as you properly said, but it's not only them who are pretty happy about this. Even Berlusconi was campaigning against the reform of the constitution that Renzi had passed in Parliament, and so he was campaigning for the no. The thing is that at the moment there is a kind of a conflict of interest. While Five Star Movements and Northern League press to go to the polls immediately with any kind of electoral system, Berlusconi doesn't seem to be ready to go to the polls, and so he kind of delays the situation and he wants to get it as later as possible. My guess is that we might go back to the polls in fall 2017, along with the election for the new government in Sicily.
Francesco, thanks very much for joining us. That was Francesco Bongara, who's a political reporter with the ANSA News Agency there. Well, you can get all the latest updates on the developments out of Italy online, including a live page with reaction from across Europe, both political and financial. Also, full analysis, including an article on why Italy's vote matters by our chief correspondent, Garen Hewitt. That's all at our website, bbc.com/news, or grab your smartphone and download the app. Well, there were elections also in Austria on Sunday, but this time the results went the way European leaders wanted. Austria's next president, Alexander Van der Bellen, says his victory sends a signal of hope to all of Europe. The left-leaning independent took 53% of the vote, defeating the far-right candidate Norbert Hofer, who campaigned on anti-immigrant platforms.
I will try to be an open-minded, a liberal-minded, and first of all, a pro-European federal president of the Republic of Austria.
Staying in Europe, and French Prime Minister Manuel Valls has announced his plans to run as president next year. He throws his hat in the ring just 4 days after President Francois Hollande said he would not seek re-election. Mr. Valls said he will step down as Prime Minister from tomorrow. He will stand as a candidate in January's socialist primaries, where opinion polls suggest he is the favourite to win. Now, Donald Trump's appointment of Ben Carson to manage the Department of Housing and Urban Development has alarmed a leading Democrat. Nancy Pelosi, head of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives, has called the appointment a disconcerting and disturbingly unqualified choice. Mr. Trump said Dr. Carson, a retired brain surgeon and one-time rival of the Republican nomination, has a brilliant mind and was passionate about strengthening communities.
Donald Trump.
Well, the BBC's Anthony Zerka is in Washington for us. Good of you to join us, Anthony. How are people seeing this in the wider political spectrum over there? Are they seeing this as the best man for the job or a recipient of a reward for a man who was loyal to Mr. Trump?
Well, I think that if you take a look at his qualifications, there's nothing that really indicates that he would be a natural fit for housing and urban development, which handles a lot of housing programs for the poor, loan programs, things like that. One of the only qualifications I've heard is that Ben Carson lived in public housing when he was younger. He was a neurosurgeon by training before he ran for president, became a conservative talking head, a conservative author. So it's a bit surprising in this pick. In fact, Ben Carson had said earlier last month that he wasn't really qualified to head a cabinet position. He had no government experience. Apparently, there's been a change of opinion within Carson's team. Now, as a whole, I think he'll probably be confirmed in the Senate. He has to be approved by a majority of senators. Republicans control that body, so it should be, if not smooth sailing, at least a positive result for him. But Donald Trump seems to trust Ben Carson. Ben Carson endorsed Donald Trump early in the presidential primaries, so this was a bit of a reward, I imagine. And we'll see what he does with the post. It's about 8,000 employees. And a fairly sizable budget. So time will tell whether he can actually manage to run as a head of an agency.
Stay with us, Anthony. We just want to bring you a development in this story. The leader of the Green Party, Jill Stein, who is fighting for the presidential election recounts in 3 of the states, she has been holding a news conference at Trump Tower. The president-elect Donald Trump narrowly beat Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin. And lawyers acting for Mr. Trump are trying to halt some of those counts. But Ms. Stein said it was important for the recounts to take place to protect American voting rights.
We're here today to stand up for exactly that, for a vote that is accurate, secure, and fair and just, in which every vote counts and every vote is counted. This, in fact, is what makes America great. The promise of democracy and the promise of justice for all.
Anthony, Ms. Stein is trying to get recounts in some of those states. She has a lawsuit to get through before even that recount begins. So Mr. Trump, you'd have to say, would be feeling rather more annoyed than worried.
I think so. There's about 100,000 vote difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in those 3 states combined. There's a recount currently going on in Wisconsin, already begun. And actually, Donald Trump right now has picked up more votes than Hillary Clinton. There's one just about set to begin in Michigan. And then there's Pennsylvania, which was a lawsuit that Jill Stein just announced. It was about an 80,000 vote lead that Donald Trump had there. And they're only doing recounts right now in a handful of precincts, about 200 out of the 9,000 total. So what she's trying to do is get a statewide recount. But given the results from Wisconsin and given the results from past recounts, I don't think we can expect to see enough of a change to tilt the election to Hillary Clinton. Although, as you did note, it is getting under Donald Trump's skin a bit. He's angrily tweeted about the recount, saying that it's been a waste of time and questioning Jill Stein's motives. So even if it doesn't make a difference, it's, I think, another example of Donald Trump using Twitter to fight back at people who are annoying him.
Anthony, good to talk to you. That's Anthony Zerka live in Washington for us. Now, Donald Trump has continued his war of words on Twitter towards China. After the controversy over his phone call with the president of Taiwan, he's now posted more tweets criticizing China's economic and military policies. Beijing is keeping diplomatically quiet, saying it wants a sound and stable relationship with the United States. Here's our China editor, Carrie Gracie.
China builds its US policy brick by brick, with not a millimetre left to chance. It's the same way it built this Great Wall, a huge, long-term strategic effort. But on the other side, the style is changing. On Twitter, a social media platform that's not even allowed past the cyber censors here, the so-called Great Firewall of China, Beijing woke to this from the US president-elect, accusing China of unfair currency and trade practices. And this one complaining of Chinese military expansion in the South China Sea. And what should China make of this? Can it read into 2 tweets from Mr. Trump that he intends to brand China a currency manipulator, to impose tariffs on Chinese goods, and to beef up US naval operations in the South China Sea? And what about his weekend tweets on Taiwan? Wondering why military and trading partners aren't allowed to talk. That was Mr. Trump's response to the storm over his phone call with the president of Taiwan. The president of where? Words matter. China regards Taiwan as a breakaway province and never calls its leader a president, referring instead to the Taiwanese regional leader. But here was Mr. Trump on Twitter again, clarifying that it wasn't him who made the call. For 40 years, China has isolated Taiwan behind a great wall of diplomatic rules, one of which is that a US leader never talks directly to their Taiwanese counterpart. So far, Beijing has blamed Taiwan for that phone call, but it can't blame Taiwan for Mr. Trump's tweets, and it must now wonder what next from @RealDonaldTrump.
Syrian government forces and their allies have now recaptured 2/3 of eastern Aleppo from rebels. A week ago, they retook Hanano, Aleppo's second biggest district, and the first seized by the opposition in 2012. For many families, it's the first chance to return to the homes they fled from when the conflict began. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, reports now from eastern Aleppo.
Homecoming. The Harrow family is back. It's been 4 years. The youngest wants you to know it. The government's green buses are bringing families to Hanano. A week ago, these neighborhoods were seized back from rebel fighters. For the Harrow family, it's a victory parade. I kiss your soil, Syria, Fadia cries. We kneel before you, Bashar. Always loyal to their president, now they feel they owe him everything. Soldiers join the celebration at their front door. Grandmother Emtithal heads straight to her favorite room. Our kitchen was amazing, she tells me. It was the envy of the neighborhood. Dala goes into her old room.
I was born here, raised here, but now we are back and we will live here again.
Just across the way, we meet a family who chose to stay.
I'm like an oak tree. If I leave my home, I will die. We have a saying here, if a man uproots himself, he is nothing. The idea of leaving and being a refugee in my own country killed me.
But it's been so hard. You can see it in Mohammed's face. We had no electricity, she says, no water, no bread. When the army moved in, everyone was taken temporarily to a camp. This is what happened to their home when they were away. They can't say for sure who or what caused it. A cruel blow after surviving 4 years of war. And that war goes on in neighboring districts. You can hear it. The stories we heard here in this one neighborhood are stories you hear across Syria. People returning to their homes, to their old lives and their old communities. But even though this war seems to be coming to an end in some places, Syrians know just how hard it will be to live together again.
That was our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, reporting from eastern Aleppo. Now, some news just into us. India media have published what appears to be a hospital statement saying that the Chief Minister of the state of Tamil Nadu, Jayalalitha Jayaram, has died. On Sunday, she suffered a cardiac arrest and has been on life support ever since. 68-year-old Jayalalitha Jayaram, who's a former movie star, was briefly jailed in 2014 on charges of corruption. But she's still hugely popular and has been in her state. The BBC's Shilpa Kannan looks back at her life.
Her co-star and mentor Marudur Gopalan Ramachandran introduced her to politics. After his death, she led his party, the All India Anna Dravida Munnetra Kalagam. Then she became Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu and served 5 terms overall. Her supporters not just followed her, they worshipped her. Ministers and voters alike have been known to prostrate themselves before her. One of her most popular initiatives was the Cradle Baby Scheme. To stop large-scale sex-selective abortions, families were allowed to leave baby girls in cradles outside state care homes, giving them a chance to live. But she was criticized for populist schemes like giving away laptops for students and television sets to families. And she was accused of corruption. During one raid, police said they found diamond-studded gold jewellery, more than 10,000 saris and 750 pairs of shoes. In 2014, she was sentenced to jail for corruption and then acquitted. But the corruption allegations continued.
To her stars, though, Jayalalitha was the perfect combination. A glamorous star on screen and a charismatic leader on the political stage. Analysts say it'll be difficult to find someone within the party to fill her shoes.
And that was Shilpa Kannan looking back at the life of Jayalalitha Jayaram, who's died at the age of 68. Now, in the UK, the highest court of appeal has begun a landmark legal case that will decide who will pull the Brexit trigger. Before formal negotiations for the UK's exit from the EU can take place, the government needs to trigger Article 50, formally notifying the EU of its intention to leave. The High Court ruled last month that MPs must give their consent before this happens, but the government wants ministers to be able to do that on their own, and it's appealing to the Supreme Court. Ben Wright reports.
It's a case of huge constitutional and political significance, a legal battle over how the government should begin the process of taking Britain out of the EU. This is Gina Miller, arriving at the Supreme Court this morning. She and her legal team argue the government must get the approval of Parliament before it can trigger divorce talks with the EU. And last month, the High Court agreed, reigniting some of the passion and pantomime of the referendum campaign itself. But the government's lawyers, led by the Attorney General, argue the Prime Minister already has the power to begin Brexit and have brought their appeal to the highest court in the UK. For the first time in its history, all 11 Supreme Court justices are sitting to hear a case that has already proved controversial, with High Court judges criticised by Brexit-supporting newspapers. And at the start of today's hearing, the President of the Supreme Court made this statement.
The justices of the court are of course aware of the public interest in this case, and we are aware of the strong feelings associated with the many other wider political questions surrounding the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union. However, as will be apparent from the arguments before us, those wider political questions are not the subject of this appeal. This appeal is concerned with legal issues, and as judges, our duty is to consider those issues impartially and to decide the case according to the law. That is what we will do.
And then the government began to make its argument. The Attorney General said ministers did have the right to make and agree new treaties using its executive powers, including the triggering of Article 50 that will begin Britain's divorce from the EU.
The triggering of Article 50, we say, will not be an exercise of prerogative power on a whim or out of a clear blue sky. It is the logical conclusion of a process in which Parliament has been fully and consciously involved, a process in which Parliament resolved to put a clear and decisive question about our nation's future to the British people, and in which Parliament expected the government to act on the answer they gave.
James Eadie, QC, also representing the government, said in passing the Referendum Act, Parliament had not chosen to limit the government's use of executive prerogative powers.
The continued existence and exercise of prerogative powers, such as in the conduct of international relations, is constitutionally sound and not suspect, and is in nature subject to parliamentary control when Parliament chooses to do so. But the premise or the basic constitutional default position is the continued existence of these fundamental powers.
But later this week, the claimants' lawyers will argue the government is trying to take away rights that have been established by Parliament. This case is not about the pros and cons of Brexit. It's not about questioning the referendum result. Britain's going to leave the European Union no matter what the Supreme Court judges decide. But it is about the process and whether the government is acting lawfully or not. And if Parliament does get a vote on when Britain leaves the European Union, that could force the government to reveal more about its negotiating plans. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
The Brazilian club Chapecoense, which lost 19 of its players in an air crash last week, has been awarded the Copa Sudamericana Championship by the governing body of South American football. It means that Chapecoense will be awarded the prize money for winning the tournament as it looks to rebuild after the disaster. Well, a remainder of our main news this hour, and the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi could leave office in the next few days after a crushing defeat in a referendum on the country's constitution. Mr. Renzi offered his resignation to Italy's president today, but will stay on to oversee the approval of the country's budget expected next week. Well, that's all from the programme. Next is the weather. But from me and all the team, I'm Tom Donkin. Get in touch with me on Twitter @TomDonkinBBC. Hope to see you soon. Goodbye.